Hey, welcome. So today we're going to tackle a question that sounds super simple on the surface, but it's actually one of the deepest questions in all of philosophy. What is a law, really? I mean, is it about what's right and just? Is it just about who's in power? Or is it something else? All right, let's just dive right in with a puzzle that has kept legal thinkers up at night for centuries. We all kind of feel like we know what a law is, but the second you try to nail down a precise definition, things get messy fast. And that's where the Analytical School of Law, or what's also known as legal positivism, comes in with a pretty radical and honestly a really powerful answer. Okay, I want you to really think about this for a second. Imagine a government passes a rule that is just profoundly unjust. I mean, truly awful. Does that rule stop being a law just because it's immoral? Or is its status as a law completely separate from whether it's good or bad? This is the core question, and it really forces you to pick a side. So, the Analytical School drops this bombshell of an answer, the Separation Thesis, and the idea is pretty startling. It basically says that a law is a law if it comes from the right source, like a parliament or a legislature, and if it was made using the correct procedures. Whether that law is morally good or evil, that's a totally separate question. So from this point of view, a bad law is still technically a law. Okay, so if law isn't necessarily connected to morality, then what in the world is it based on? Well, one of the first and most influential thinkers to really try and answer this was a 19th century philosopher named John Austin. He wanted to create a clear, almost scientific definition of law, one that was totally stripped of any fuzzy moral judgments. What Austin came up with is this incredibly simple three-part formula. For him, a law is just these three things. First, it's a command, an order, from a superior to an inferior. Pretty straightforward. Second, that superior has to be a sovereign. Now, that's just a fancy word for the ultimate boss, the person or group that everyone else obeys but who doesn't obey anyone else. And third, and this is crucial, that command has to be backed by a sanction, a threat, a punishment if you don't do what you're told. It's just so simple and powerful, right? Almost mechanical. For Austin, law isn't about some lofty ideal of justice. Nope. It's about power, commands, and what happens if you step out of line. You could honestly call it the boss with a threat model of law. But as elegant and tidy as Austin's theory is, that simplicity, well, it turned out to be its biggest weakness. It didn't take long for other thinkers to start poking holes in it, pointing out some pretty serious cracks, especially when you try to apply it to a complex, modern legal system, like the ones we have today. Here's the thing. This boss with a threat model just doesn't cover a huge amount of what we actually call law. For example, what about the rules for how to make a valid will or a legal contract? Those aren't commands with threats. They're rules that actually give you power to do things. Or think about customary law, rules that just grow out of how a community behaves over time, not from some boss's command. Austin's theory also has a really tough time explaining how laws just keep going when one ruler dies and another takes over. And it completely falls apart when you look at something like international law, where there's no single, all-powerful boss. So this is where the 20th century philosopher H.L.A. Hart enters the picture. He loved the core idea of legal positivism, that law and morality are separate things. But he knew the old model needed a serious upgrade. So he built a much more sophisticated machine to explain how a modern legal system really works. Hart's genius insight was realizing that a mature legal system isn't just one kind of rule, but a combination of two totally different types. First, you have primary rules. These are the basic do's and don'ts that apply to everyone. Stop at a red light, don't steal things. But then, and this is the game changer, you have secondary rules. These are the rules about the other rules. They don't tell you how to drive. They tell the government how to create new traffic laws or how judges should apply them. They're like the entire operating system for the law. And these secondary rules are brilliant because they solve the exact problems that Austin's theory couldn't handle. See, if you only had primary rules, your society would be a mess. First, you'd have uncertainty. How do we know for sure what the rules are? Hart's rule of recognition solves that. It's the master blueprint, like a constitution, that tells everyone how to spot a real law. Second, the rules would be static and could never change. The rules of change fix that by creating legislatures that can update old laws. And finally, it'd be super inefficient. Who decides when a rule is broken? The rules of adjudication create courts and judges to do exactly that. So, okay, we've got Austin, we've got Hart, we've got primary and secondary rules. why does any of this academic debate actually matter in the real world? Why should we care? Well, it turns out this way of thinking gives us an incredibly powerful tool. Here's the big takeaway. By separating law from our feelings about what's right and wrong, legal positivism lets us analyze any legal system with clear eyes. We can look at its structure, its rules, how it all fits together, without getting stuck on whether we think its laws are good or bad. It's about understanding how the machine works, not judging what the machine produces. And that leads us to one final, really deep question to chew on. If Hart is right, and a legal system is just this complex web of social rules that we all, for the most part, agree to follow, where does its authority over us really come from? Is it just a habit, a shared agreement, or is there something more to it? And that, right there, is the mystery at the heart of what law truly is.